Indiana Jones and the Great Circle feels like a proper Indiana Jones experience. This recent Xbox Series X, S, and PlayStation 5 title from Machine Games, set in the world of the famous Steven Spielberg-directed swashbuckling films involving Harrison Ford's titular Indiana Jones, who is an archaeologist, sly scoundrel, and a man that has fun f***ing up Nazis, a true man of the people and icon of this current era, is a terrific love letter to the storied cinematic franchise, both in terms of its high-quality craftsmanship and, more importantly, due to its absolute reverence to all the series' core identifiable traits, whether that be the overall sense of adventure, its comedic chops, the biblical supernatural element, various locales that Indy travels to across the world, and an overall disdain for fascism. Because obviously, Indy understands that the healthiest remedy to Nazism is a well-placed punch in the face. Hey fascists, it's knuckle time. With that, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle understands what a good Indiana Jones game requires. And admittedly, this isn't exactly a new hot take. If anything, as far as opinions go, this take is freezing cold. It's absolutely frigid, like sticking your dick in a freezer. After all, IGN's Chris Connor wrote a very good article with similar subject matter titled "Video Games Are the Future for Dead Franchises Like Indiana Jones," which I very much recommend reading because it's very interesting and makes a lot of correct points. Even though, unlike the author, I am one of those sad sacks of shit that enjoyed Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, i.e. the most recent Indiana Jones film. Sure, it wasn't necessarily a great Indiana Jones adventure, but it was good enough to wash out the stench that was Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and its utter incomprehensible nonsense, as well as its waste of a villainous Cate Blanchett, something that I consider to be high treason against the art of cinema. But regardless, as I said at the start, this article has strong PED-infused arguments, basically the jerks and profar of positing good points, much of which focus on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's narrative aspect and setting, given that unlike a modern Harrison Ford vehicle, like You Better Not Touch That Dial of Destiny, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's developers can and did craft an Indiana Jones video game set in the 1930s, roughly a year or so after the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, i.e. the classic era that we most commonly associate with the Indiana Jones franchise, or rather, to paraphrase a point in the article, it features Indy in his prime and the style of narrative that comes along with it. Additionally, the article notates some aspects regarding gameplay and such, but that wasn't really the focus of that piece. If anything, it was overlooked in favor of other points, which is fine, but as far as this video goes, I desire to detail those aforementioned aspects that were either only briefly mentioned or just entirely overlooked hotel, because truly, I hope to go a little bit more in depth on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle here. And to begin, let's start by talking about the story. The plot follows Indiana Jones as he goes on an adventure where he infiltrates territory either occupied or controlled by Nazis and or Italian fascists in order to investigate why these villainous factions are stealing artifacts they believe have mystical qualities due to being in connection to the old legend of the Great Circle, i.e. a real-life conspiracy theory where various ancient sites exist and form a geographical circle when mapped out, or rather a near-perfect circle, no relation. And from there, it's up to Indiana Jones to prevent these Nazis and fascists from acquiring historical important artifacts that could potentially have supernatural capabilities that would benefit the morally evil Third Reich in an upcoming world war. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's narrative works because it embodies the spirit of Indiana Jones. It's a fun swashbuckling adventure with many diverse locales in terms of setting, design, and geographic location. Hell, Indy travels to more places than the Harlem Globetrotters here. The game has a great sense of humor that reminded me a bit of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, because, you know, Indiana Jones pretending to be a priest is just funny as shit. And then there's the fact that the supporting characters are interesting and feature some great performances. But here are a few most notable. There's Alessandra Mostranardi's Janetta Lombardi, a journalist and Indy's love interest in the game, the late Tony Todd's Locus, who is a mysterious third party to the main conflict who both helps and hinders Indy's adventure, and then there's Marios Gavrilis, Emmerich Voss, the Nazi villain of the saga, who is a predictably loathsome presence, because he's an asshole, even by Nazi standards. I mean, yeah, he's a fascist and believes in the superiority of a race that loves sauerkraut, but he is also just a complete and utter dick. The type you go, Yeah, I really look forward to that guy's death scene. Which, hey, that's not a spoiler. Fascists don't win in Indiana Jones. That's what the real world is for. Meaning that Voss is just the quintessential piece of shit Nazi villain that a good Indiana Jones story requires. Hashtag Indiana Jones and the Great Circle jerk. However, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's most notable character and performance is Troy Baker's take on Indiana Jones, because obviously, Indiana Jones is the most important character in an Indiana Jones game. Please take a moment to rearrange your shocked facial expression. You look like you just shit yourself. And there are two critical reasons why Indiana Jones works as a character in this game. Firstly, because Indiana Jones is written to feel like Indiana Jones. He's sly, pretty cool, wicked smart, ain't afraid to get his hands dirty, and also makes offhanded comments during gameplay such as fascists can't be trusted with money. And yeah, that sounds like something that Indiana Jones would say, proving that the game understands what our boy Indy stands for. And secondly, and possibly most importantly, Troy Baker's performance as Indiana Jones is absolutely fantastic. Hell, it's probably more impressive than Harrison Ford's performance in the live-action movies, because let's be honest, Harrison Ford generally just plays Harrison Ford, and oftentimes that is very compelling and entertaining because Harrison Ford is very good at playing Harrison Ford. But for Troy Baker, he not only has to become Indiana Jones, but has to vocally mimic the way Harrison Ford sounded circa the 1980s, and Baker absolutely nails it. Like, there are long stretches of this game where I thought I was hearing Harrison Ford's voice rather than Troy Baker's damn near spot-on impression of him, because that's just how good Troy Baker sounds in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. You just sometimes forget that this is a Troy Baker performance, ultimately capturing the spirit of Indiana Jones as a character, and thus allowing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle to feel like a true Indiana Jones adventure. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's level design and gameplay both echo and replicate many franchisal traits inherent to Indiana Jones as a series. Starting with the levels, there are several different locales Indy and his cohort Gina travel to that are generally more of a linear and scripted design, whereas there are 3 larger levels with more of an open-ended design that the player will be spending the vast majority of the game in. 3 levels that aren't necessarily open world, but are essentially big enough to feature a variety of story quests, side quests, valuable collectibles, and items that upgrade your abilities. So yeah, these stages are sizable, they got girth, and traversing these stages is reminiscent of stuff that happens in the Indiana Jones movies. Indy utilizes his whip to climb up walls or swing to other areas as if he were Spider-Man. He accrues disguises that can help him avoid the attention of Nazis, which also allows him to enter restricted areas. There are numerous puzzles, more than you might expect in an action-adventure game, that are incredibly intuitive and well thought out. Like, a good amount of these puzzles don't feel obvious. They actually have a certain challenge to them, which is great because it makes you feel just as smart as one Dr. Jones. There's the ancient traps placed inside ruins and temples that Indy must avoid or disarm, like those seen in the iconic opening sequence in Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, the scene where Dr. Octopus gets shanked. And the 3 stages are unique both in setting and in gameplay. One of the stages requires more stealth, one is kind of what you'd associate with the Indiana Jones property, and another needs to be traversed via boat. Because I'm on a boat, motherfucker. It's all stuff that simultaneously keeps the gameplay loop invigorating, all while staying true to the old school Indiana Jones films. It's fun while still being reverent to the franchise. And Indiana Jones and the Great Circle's moment-to-moment combat gameplay further embodies this balance. See, most combat sections start as stealth encounters. When entering a restricted area occupied by fascists or Nazis, Indy must sneak around, traverse the levels with his whip and parkour skills to avoid line of sight, knock out enemies from behind, move these said knocked out enemies to less conspicuous areas, throw objects to distract enemies, time things right when you need to discreetly open a safe, something that enemies believe to be very suspicious for some reason. And if you have acquired a disguise, use that said disguise to blend in with civilians or with enemies, though there are particular adversaries who can see through Indy's disguise, so it's best to be discreet when they're around. But whatever the case, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle usually features many gameplay approaches that the player can utilize in order to figure out the best path forward for their playstyle as well. There's a lot to work with here, even to the point that the player can formulate a strategy that can admittedly backfire and blow up in your face in spectacular fashion, like 5 hours worth of gooning. Quick aside, if you don't know what gooning is, I really don't recommend looking it up. Save your innocence while you can, you pure, delicate, and beautiful soul. But anyway, the point. Your tactical approach to Indiana Jones and the Great Circle stealth gameplay can easily go awry, because best laid plans and all that, meaning that you must pivot and improvise by either confronting adversaries head-on, attempt to escape, or do a bit of both. And this very much encapsulates the feel of Indiana Jones as a character and IP. After all, in the movies, Indy's schemes to infiltrate enemy territory often don't act out in the way that he envisions, meaning that he must enact an impromptu solution. He must improvise, because to err is to f*** up, and to f*** up is to be Indiana Jones. And Indiana Jones and the Great Circle encapsulates this feeling perfectly, because like the movie version of Indy, the video game Indy that is piloted by we the idiot people will run into various hitches that result in our plans falling apart, which means we have to do Indy-like things and resort to our fisticuffs, use his whip to stun enemies, as well as forcing enemies to drop their weapons, as well as scaring away potential German shepherds, because Indy doesn't kill dogs. He loves dogs. Dogs don't know what a fascism is, they're just pupper. Then there's grabbing an abundance of items found in the game's world in order to utilize them as weapons, unholstering Indy's iconic revolver and start blasting, and picking up the guns of mortally dispatched German soldiers in order to use their own weapons against their comrades, which is just very in line with the spirit of Indiana Jones as a series, and I love it for that. Admittedly, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle has a fair few minor faults. The enemy AI is incredibly dumb, even by the standards of Nazis. If anything, they lack much in the way of strategic thinking and have an attention span that is ridiculously short, even compared to my ADHD brain. Now to think about that platypus. Meaning that escaping from them or fighting them head-on and succeeding doesn't always feel entirely earned. You can travel back to other big levels even though you leave one of them on terms that had suggested finality. Kinda awkward to go back to that place as if nothing happened. I'll just do what Marvel does and just blame it on a scroll. I questioned whether or not Indy kills enemies or knocks them out when using melee weapons. The first-person shooter gunplay is probably the weakest part of the core gameplay experience, because unless there is an action set piece, guns aren't very satisfying to use and are often used as a last resort, no relation, rather than a viable way to approach the game, which given how rudimentary the gunplay is and how shooting enemies lacks a sense of weight or much in the way of accomplishment, this aspect of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle just feels like an afterthought. And then finally, there are a few moments that break immersion, like sneaking through an enemy encampment with minimal enemy fatalities in order to free someone, only for that said newly freed person to walk out to the front door where all the enemies I didn't dispatch were probably very bewildered. And then there were also times, a lot of times, where random passersby wouldn't be surprised by the odd shit I was doing. For example, I'd be disguised as a priest and then do something very uncharacteristic of a priest in public, like swing with a whip to reach a platform, to which sometimes the neutral NPCs just don't react. It just makes me think it's normal to swing from a whip to an opposing side that is otherwise unreachable. But hey, I guess this is something that Catholics learn in priest school, because back in the day, Vacation Bible School must have been some really intense shit. But regardless, all these flaws cause Indiana Jones and the Great Circle to be faulty. Sure, these are not game-breaking and or game-quitting issues, but they are notable enough that they prevent this game from reaching perfection or damn near close to it. There are a lot of issues. Still, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a great game. In fact, for reasons I stated all throughout this video, this title stays true to the Indiana Jones franchise, all while being a compelling action-adventure game in its own right, which is a big deal considering that Indiana Jones majorly inspired the video game action-adventure genre. Even Uncharted, arguably gaming's most beloved action-adventure franchise. Hell, a lot of the appeal of Uncharted is that it is kind of like a playable Indiana Jones adventure, though to be clear, there are stark differences. Main protagonist Nathan Drake is more of a mischievous rogue, more so than Indiana Jones, and the Uncharted games feel like a playable modern blockbuster with a focus on fluid action and third-person shooter gameplay more so than any sort of puzzle solving. But even with that said, the similarities are still there, i.e. there's a main character and some supporting characters who travel to exotic locations and explore ruins, temples, and such in order to plunder ancient artifacts and compete against another more violent and antagonistic faction that wants those said artifacts because they might have supernatural capabilities. Also, both lead characters have trouble with women, so yeah, the commonalities are clear as day. Yet, what really impresses me about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is that the developers didn't choose the easiest option when it came to creating this game, that option being just copying Uncharted and hoping for the best. No, instead, they remain true to the spirit of this franchise for the reasons mentioned earlier in this video, all while adding other elements that differ from Uncharted, like a health bar, stamina, vendors that sell items, ability upgrades, a first-person perspective rather than third-person, a second wind system involving Indy's hat, and action set pieces that harken back to 80s Indiana Jones movies, like being in the gunner seat on a plane, or just something that involves Indy's fear of snakes, meaning that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is uniquely in its own great style, separate from the Uncharted series and all of its copycats. If anything, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a rarity in the action-adventure genre, a true one of one, a treasure that ultimately belongs in a museum.